is EVP and Global Sector Director for Innovation at HKS, an international architectural firm where she oversees a range of innovation practices that work within, through, and beyond the built environment for meaningful impact. Prior to her current role, Upali was the Global Research Director of the firm, as well as the Executive Director for the nonprofit Center for Advanced Design Research and Education. Upali received her bachelor's degree in architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi, her MA from the National University of Singapore, and her doctorate degree in architecture from Texas A&M. Upali teaches as Associate Professor of Practice at the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan, and she serves on the board of the Academy for the Neuroscience of Architecture. Her talk today is titled Brain Health and Creativity in Design, an Industry Perspective. Please join me in welcoming Upali to SfNC 2024. Thank you, Upali, for being here.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. You're going to be my most responsive person in the crowd. I know it. I just landed last night. I was a little late for the morning presentations, and I took notes so fast, I think my hand will break. So before we say anything else, I want to say that everything that you're doing is so highly relevant to our industry. And there is a bridge that is missing between the work that is being done in the scientific community and academia and the industry that is investing in creativity and really creating products and designs from it. So if nothing else happens, if the PowerPoint doesn't work, if we never meet again, know that bridge building is the primary thing we can do today, and that's what I hope we achieve. I think I'm done. We're good. All right. So I'll start with just a little bit about what our industry is going through right now. How many scientists in the room? Just a show of hands. Okay. How many people from the design community? Not enough hands. How many from the computational or computer science community? Also not enough hands. How many investors in creativity? Thank you. In a way, where we are today, we all have to be investors in creativity. And I would say I represent a big corporation that is an investor in creativity because we are a design firm. What is happening in our field today is the kind of challenges that we are facing. Take climate change, take the advent of AI, take the push towards justice, equity, and diversity, the huge pandemic of mental health, what have you. It's a really ripe time for change, but we don't quite know how to navigate it. And in a sense, that is the promise of creativity. A little bit about who we are and why you might want to pay a little bit of attention. We're a big, huge architecture firm, as architecture firms go. We were established in 1939. We have 1,600 employees, 29 offices, designed and constructed more than $600 billion of huge facilities. So I put this slide up to say this is a profession, a corporation that has come out of a profession that comes out of creativity. Right? And it has a large global footprint. If you're ever looking for designers in different countries, please tell me. We would probably be able to provide access to a broad range of talent. This is where we are. And as we were going through this process of just putting slides together, questions kept coming even in our minds about, does it make a difference if you're a designer in LA versus a designer in Miami? What does the culture of the city say about what you're actually doing as a creative professional in that city? What does it mean? We usually do really big projects. So from airports to hospitals to stadiums, Do you guys know the SoFi Stadium in LA, the big, gigantic one? That's one of our projects. So huge, complex projects. The interesting thing about doing those kind of projects, is you start with an idea. The idea has to be realizable, and then it has a million complex constraints put on it. Right? So it's a very interesting scale at which we work in general. And what is also really interesting is, outside of just doing core architecture, most big architecture firms also do things like urban design, a little bit of structural engineering, advisory or pre-consulting services, experience design. So the gamut of what we offer is way beyond the built environment itself. I put that as just a context of investment and what you do and why it's so important. We are facing this inflection point that I talked about, where you're trying to balance human health and planet health. You're trying to balance out those tensions between them, which is why I really appreciated Wema's presentation. I think climate action is a human perception problem, but we don't talk about it. And those that talk about climate action talk about it in a completely different vocabulary than those who talk about behavior change. But behavior change is what you need for climate justice to happen. So it's a very interesting place to be when you realize that we have super specialized ourselves to a point where we can't talk to each other about common sense things. And that is part of what we're starting to see, is we have all of the tools. We have the appetite. We're not able to change our behaviors for where we need to be. The other thing that's really interesting, at least in our profession, is it used to be about buildings, and buildings were physical things. They no longer are physical things. In addition to footprints, you're thinking about cloud prints. You're thinking about the big digital infrastructure. AI is really interesting as an example. For our profession, you think about it as a headwind. What does it mean? If some of the work is going to be done by machines, what is the architect going to do? What is the designer going to do? What do we need to really automate? How do we need to get ahead of these image-generating softwares? We're having all of these conversations as a headwind. What's a tailwind that's coming out? The huge amounts of data centers, like data that is needed now, data centers are being created. An entirely new typology has come up. That's a tailwind. Those data centers are actually sucking energy at unprecedented rates. So these are the kind of things where you say something's a headwind, there's always a tailwind, and you're riding them all the time when you're in the real world and in the industry. It's also interesting to see the shift that's happened. Like, I started my passion for this in-between space of neuroscience and architecture as a doctoral student almost 2 decades ago now. And that time it used to be, I was really interested in designing for the senses and really interested in perception. Now you have sensing buildings. The paradigm has changed. If we needed, the building could physically evolve and respond to what your wearable device is telling you. The potential exists. There is so much potential and so much complexity in unpacking that potential, which is why, again, the promise of creativity is so high. And I'll end with this, which is another thing I find fascinating, that it's a world where we are inundated with data, like so much data. Everyone is measuring something or the other. And whatever you can measure, you're measuring. Whatever you can get your hands on, you're measuring. But what's the difference we make? What's the delta? And I think that has become the question that's driving me over the last few years, is why? Have we made a palpable change in something that really matters through what we are doing? All of that complexity is still resulting in this. All of that potential, all of that amazing work we could do, and we are exhausted. We have never been more exhausted as a generation. And if you talk to the design community, they will tell you that they have no time to create. They're exhausted, and their job is to think and create. And it's really interesting. I loved the term cognitive offloading. That was the promise of automation and digital tools. Hasn't happened yet. Right now, it's just cognitive loading, because you have to learn a million different things that you don't know how they talk to each other. and you're not offloading, which is the promise. So the gap between the potential and the promise and the actual execution is usually where impact doesn't happen. Part of what we did was we said, maybe we need to see our world through the art and science of just being human, not human-centered, but being human, because that's the lens we have. That is why it's so important to know what is happening in the brain. And so this investment for us in brain and building is a pretty serious one, which we've been going through as an institution for a few years now. This is a range of things we're working on, like looking at enriched environments as a framework for senior living, trying to think about how socio-emotional learning can happen through understanding the science of learning, sensory environments for dementia care. So this is on the lower side, you see everything, which is about application of science into the world of design. The work on brain capital, my friend Theo is in the audience here today. This is what we are starting to do now. Creativity in the brain economy is something we're very interested in, which is why I'm so excited to be here. The relationship between AI and the human brain, ideas of things like neurourbanism, the stuff that you see in italics is emerging areas for us. But this is not a new commitment. It's a commitment we made a few years back because we said, that's it. That's all we have to give. What's in there is all we have to give the industry. And if we don't know how to tap the full potential of what's in there, we will have nothing to give. And that is why I'm super excited to be in this room, although I will tell you that this room is not conducive to creativity. So the designer is revolting a little bit. All right, I also want to talk about vision, right? Like when you have big institutions, how do they envision what their futures are? And for HKS, the vision is through limitless thinking, we want to be the most influential firm in the industry. Now that's a little arrogant. I don't think there's anyone from my firm here, so I'm good. But that's the kind of vision you want, to be able to make your business survive. And it has nothing about design in it, because design comes out of limitless thinking. It comes out of divergent thinking. It comes out of thinking differently, because otherwise you can find it off the shelf somewhere, right? So I wanted to kind of share that, and again, why the investment in creativity is so important. And in some ways, when you put a vision like that, your currency is creativity, curiosity, tangible innovation, things that you can point at and say, this is something new, iteratively or transformatively, that has done this, which makes it worth the investment. Okay? That is the argument you have to make, and that is how you build authentic influence, where you can point back to something and say, this is how we worked, this is what we did, this is how it improved, it had a delta, and this is why we think we can have an impact. So all of these different typologies that you see, all of these different buildings that you see, things that have come out of this firm, these have come out of a collection of creative minds, not just within the firm, but with all the engineers, structural engineers, MEP engineers, people that you're working with to realize a physical or a digital manifest of what you conceived initially. And again, I want to show this to you, like that last one was a facade treatment. The facade treatment is the kind of treatment that has never been done before. It came from a sustainability problem, and it resulted in 3 innovations: what the building envelope could do, what the material itself could do, and then how it was communicated, because they communicated it entirely digitally at a time when everything was still presented in paper drawings, and the digital seal itself became a patent. So it's a really interesting thing, because it started with just a problem. I want a really breathable facade. It resulted in 3 different types of innovation that you can go back to and say, that's very tangible. That's an outcome that we've had. So fostering creativity, obviously, you have a vested interest in you. We really need the creative minds. You get really frustrated when your best minds are not doing their best work, because that's why you have a firm of designers. So what I did was I reached out to some of our best designers, that is not me, just for the record, and asked a few questions. The first set of questions was, what does creativity mean to you as a designer, and how do you recognize it? This is not a research study. It's purely qualitative. It was taking a pulse. The first thing that was really interesting is anytime you send a survey to designers, they never respond. Apparently, when you send a survey about creativity, they respond really well. I thought it was fascinating. We never get responses from them, but they really spend time. They really spend time really thinking about it. As a designer, it involves the ability to see connections and possibilities that others may not, envisioning solutions unexpected and functional, ability to recognize the problem not highlighted and direct, but uncovered and given voice, driven by fearless curiosity, delivering beyond the status quo, and being comfortable outside of the safety of the tried and true. Now, bear in mind, none of them have ever read a paper on creativity. This is coming from the design industry's definition of what that word means to them. And there are 36 responses that we got. I am more than happy to share the raw data with everybody in this room, if you are interested, because they would be interested in doing the same too. And I wanted to show this. This is Greg Longo, who is one of our design leaders, who says it's building up the past, but revealing or discovering unseen potential that results in a novel approach or solution. These are his preliminary sketches. This is the final hospital that was designed. So you have that creative exploration, then you have to make it real, you have to bring about the engineering component of it, and then you have a final manifest, which is pretty cool. And through this process, we have actually started collecting sketches and saying, what did it look like? So again, the previous presentation that talked about backwards, forwards, and resist, I think it's fascinating. I think we could show you a portfolio of projects and say what resisted. And design has this culture of crit, right? Where you give crits to students all the time, and it's feedback, and it's often negative feedback, and what's the evolution of feedback? So the intentionality that is happening in the science is not necessarily reflected in what is happening in the design profession. But there is appetite. There is a lot of appetite to test these things out, which is, again, why I'm so grateful, Leela, that you invited me here. A lot of what our world looks like is creative collusions. People have been trying to do this on Zoom of late, trying to do digital collaborations, reached a certain point of doing digital collaborations. There's still something about the creative energy of being in the room. And every time, I'm actually coming from a retreat right now where 70 designers were in the room, and they kept saying something's missing, we don't know what. The creative energy is missing. We don't know what. Is it, will it help if we have density of people in the room? Is it something else? Is it that we have too many things to do? We don't know. But there is this thirst for the creative energy that they feel nostalgic about. Is that purely a perception thing? Is it a fixation? I don't know. But it is interesting that that is a sentiment, that we don't have enough creative collusions, but it's an industry that strives on it. So here was the second question I asked: what, in your opinion as a designer, is a condition for creativity? In what conditions do you feel creativity thrives? And how do you foster it while working on design? And how do you do it for the team? And I thought it was really interesting. Environments that encourage exploration, collaboration, open-mindedness, diverse teams, the state of being uninterruptible. So you talk about collaboration, which is constant interruption, and you talk about the state of being uninterruptible. And both of those are so important for that state of flow. So again, something to really dig into, that how does this community feel about the conditions of creativity? How does this community actively create it? And does it work? So it's a petri dish. We are a lab, and we are more than willing to be lab rats. If that is how we can move the needle for what we need as society. I was fascinated by how often in this very qualitative 32 responses, how often the word play came up. The need for play. And Theo is smiling because he talks about this often. But we don't really have anything built into our structures right now. Our world of a design profession is as dictated by Outlook as everyone else's. Something's shifted. You don't go away and think and come back. You're still segmenting your time into these false brackets of 60 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, which wasn't the case 10 years ago. So it's an interesting shift in how firms work or corporate culture works versus how creativity works. And what's the tension between those two? Because that would be interesting to unpack. The 4 Ps that I understand, we actually have someone on our team who has a PhD in creativity in place, and she's not here today, and I am, which is very strange. But she told me that the 4 Ps are really important when they talk about creativity in place and the importance of people, process, place, and product. And we again asked our own designers to rank, and you'll see how people is first, process is second, the environment you're in is third, and the product and output is least important to them. So again, just an interesting insight and a fair amount of agreement. We did not run any statistical tests. This was done literally in 5 days for me to come to the keynote. So full disclosure. But the questions they had for you is the really interesting part. I said, if you could ask this community, if I could be your voice, and if you could ask this community questions, what would those be? And here are some of them. Can creativity be learned, trained, or improved? Does everyone have the same cognitive ability to be creative? Does stress improve creativity or hinder it? How do neurological differences between introverts and extroverts affect creative process? What common elements are linked to the most creative and transformational people in the world? And I'm sure there are those of you in the audience who will be like, I know answers to a few of those, which I would love to hear. And these were kind of 10 that I put down there. Number 7 is one of my favorites. How can I activate flow state on command? But if you could just do that, we would bottle that up. Where does it come from? Where do new ideas arise from? What are the mechanics or chemical pathways? What conditions shut down and stifle creativity? Number 10 is also really interesting. What is the optimal duration to solve a complex problem? For example, if it's too long, creative solutions get muddled. If it's too short, a big idea may not have time to be born. How do you do that? These are questions a designer is asking themselves all the time. And again, happy to share a full list of 36 questions your way. But they really loved the idea that they could ask it. Even number 2 is interesting. How can human creativity be amplified? If I have it, if I have the base of it, can it be amplified? Can it be stifled? Imagine the number of companies out there and institutions and entities, even academic institutions, that are fundamentally invested in harnessing the power of the brain. If we could say, this is how you can amplify it, how huge would that be? So these are questions for us to ponder on. It's something I hope we will have time to talk about. I will shift a little bit and speak about the brain health component of it. What we did as a firm, our first step was investing in brain health. The first thing we said was that we're actually not doing so well cognitively. We are burnt out, we are tired, we don't have time to think. What do we do? And we did a partnership with the Center for Brain Health to learn from them and do something that we didn't know existed, which was brain health training. And this is an interesting exercise we're in the middle of because they are collecting a lot of data and our research team is collecting a lot of data as we speak. They have a series of 9 strategies in terms of how you focus, how you rest, how you zoom in, zoom out, and zoom deep and wide to really think about a problem. How do you think about the infinite, the paradox? How do you feel comfortable in that state of unknown? I suspect if you look at this framework, you'll find a lot of overlap with the science of creativity. But we kind of went through the training with the center. And then we had 150 people in our cohort at HKS that did the training, and we had pre and post data on them. So the first, and this paper is also a journal publication. I will send the citation to Leela later. I realize it's not on the deck right now. But the first thing was we realized that this cohort that went through, and it was really simple things. It was really simple things like elephants and rabbits, like focus tasks for 45 minutes a day. Do you know how hard it is for people to do one thing for 45 minutes a day? Incredibly hard. But that was the kind of intervention we did, really, really simple. But we did see an improvement in the brain health index, which the center has. We realized that managing distractions was the key challenge. We also found a very interesting correlation between multitasking, self-perceived effectiveness, and burnout. As architects, we've been very interested in where you work. Would we have a different conversation if we were in a different environment? Would the tenor of our conversation change if we were not in this room? Would it change if we weren't organized this way? Would it change if we were in a circle? What would change if eye contact was different and distance was different? These are the kind of things we're really interested in. In the conditions for creativity, what role does the environment play? Okay? And so one of the things that we got into is how do you create brain healthy affordances in the place you work in, brain healthy workplace habits, and really about perceived connections to the team. So these were our ABCs, something we walked away from, but this first one was the most important to us. Align your intent with your environment. If you want to do creative work, where should you go? Who should you be with? If you sit in front of your workstation and think ideas are going to come to you, quite likely they will not. So this idea of aligning intent and environment has become really interesting to us, balancing the workday in terms of how you balance your time. You talk about your balanced diet with all your fruits and veggies and carbs and proteins. What's the equivalent? What's the cognitive equivalent of a day? And what is that for a creative professional? What should it look like? Because it certainly shouldn't look like 25 meetings in an 8-hour day, which are all quickly segmented. There's something off there. And then connecting and exercising choice and control, which isn't that new per se. These were the 5 affordances from a design perspective. Environments that foster focus, exploration, collaboration, rest, social connection. This is what it looks like. So we actually have an office in Atlanta, which is our brain health living lab right now. All the staff are doing the brain health training. Spaces have been designed to foster certain kinds of behaviors, and we're trying to see if there is going to be a different. So there is an area that's actually called a brain sphere. There's an idea theater. There's a cafe. There's a rapid ops room. Rapid ops is where you come in for stressful thinking. So it's like a war room. And you create these conditions saying you have to solve this problem. You have 2 hours to solve it. You all get in, you solve it, you get out. Right? So it's interesting that we have all of these conditions where you have respite or you have open ideation, it's no pressure, and then you have a rapid ops where you're like, go. 2 hours, this much is riding on it, we have to get this solved. And it's very contrasting conditions for the kind of ideas that would generate from it. We have also taken a stab at what a brain healthy day in the life might look like. So this idea that based on who you are and the kind of person you are, how do you mix and match your social connection, focus, ideation, collaboration, and relaxation? How do I create my brain healthy day? I'm someone, my best ideas come at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm exhausted by 3. I work with someone whose best ideas come at 3 a.m. in the night. I'm exhausted in the mornings. We work in teams. How do you craft a brain healthy day in the life of an individual and a team in this context? And we are playing around with that right now. This is a sketch I love. This came from one of our interior designers. This idea of where between physical and virtual, and where between individual and collective. Do you do different types of things? And trying to figure that out, right? Like if I'm working on a concept, where do I want to be? I want to be in the we zone with a lot of people, and I want to be in person. If I'm working on an article, maybe I'm fine with being virtual and being by myself. And we're also trying to figure that component out. And it's fun because as a design researcher, I have realized that it's virtually impossible to make a designer read something for extended periods of time. So we landed up creating exhibits of our brain health work and making it a visual artifact that is on display and on rotation and goes around different places. But that is how we have tried to bridge the gap between the science and the designer that should be using the science to make impact. Okay? I'll end with these 2 thoughts that we're always somewhere. We're never outside of our bodies and outside of an environment. We're always somewhere, and that somewhere shapes our experiences. How? Why? We don't know. We certainly don't know enough. And does it shape our experiences to truly unlock the potential we have in here? Not yet. But it does shape things like health and learning and climate action and climate justice, the big deltas I was talking about, the sense of belonging. It matters. All of the things that we do when we shape our environments matter. So for me, this opportunity here is to build coalitions with you all, to be the bridge between the design industry and the science industry and the technology industry, because that's a conversation that needs to happen, and hopefully to start a conversation that we have some time for. Thank you so much for your time.
This is so interesting in so many ways. We have a little bit of time for questions. Questions from the audience?
Does the room need a mic, or is it for people online? I see.
Hi. So I'm really inspired by how you're cultivating a culture of creativity in your firm. And I wondered more specifically, how do you encourage cognitive replenishment within the workday that is conducive to creativity?
Thank you for that question. And you saw in the affordances respite, but it's one of the key ones. For our workplaces, we are really trying to push hard on creating spaces for social respite together with others and spaces where you can be alone. I think nature is our underutilized resource for creating respite. And we're really trying to build that bridge in better ways. So one of the things with connection to nature is it's good for the climate, it's good for human health, it's good for respite, like it meets all of those. Unfortunately, we are in a time where we have a lot of aging infrastructure that did not think about biophilia when it was being designed. So that's the tension that we are trying to resolve. But it is top of mind because burnout, the statistics around it are very real. We are starting to see more attrition. We're starting to see people take more sabbaticals. They're just exhausted cognitively. So it's one of the reasons why the Brain Healthy study started and respite was one of the key things that came up. If you look at the findings, we're also seeing that even just taking that 5-minute break that's recommended is starting to see effects in self-reported burnout. But creating environments of that should be a requirement in design briefs. Clients have to start prioritizing that, and they will when the science shows that there's a very direct return on putting in those places for respite. Appreciate the question.
That was an amazing talk. It resonates so deeply with Christina around last night talking about how like this isn't just an opportunity. Like we're studying the neuroscience of creativity, how the underlying computer mechanisms of flow states and creativity, the whole world of creative design and engineering out there that's joint forces to augment human performance, make awesome teams and groups. So thank you for pointing that out, highlighting that throughout your talk. This is working in the flow area, so I'll keep bringing this up a little conference probably. I want to be able to talk about metacognitive awareness of kind of how you're thinking. I feel like in terms of augmentation and fostering flow states, for an expert in a domain, like they are aware when they're working efficiently, effectively, everything's moving together, action and awareness emerging, all the time is distorted, the descriptions. I wanted to talk about that at all within your organization. And lastly, if you notice that people as a mixed bag of like team flow people versus individual flow people. I saw some kind of mixed data points there about how people might like to be alone sometimes. But are there certain people that excel in certain situations more than others? I'd like to just hear kind of more about how the organization works in terms of that.
Hopefully we'll find those answers together. And that was also the question about introverts and extroverts and styles of creativity. I think you're very right about how the really amazing designers have a very high sense of when they're in that state, and they know how to grow onto it. Okay? In an industry which is half-paced, they really, really also know how to create it very quickly under deadline, right? They know how to reach that zone. Heath May is one of my collaborators who leads our computational design group, and we were riffing about this topic, and they have this sense saying, yeah, I know when I feel it. I know when I'm in the zone. Like I can feel it and I hold on to it. And it's everything I can do to hold on to it, but it matters. Wasn't there a paper recently with jazz musicians? That was you? Oh my goodness. Much longer conversation. So
the experts say, like, I mean, they judge. I've been improvising for 20 years, so this is born out of what, like, I know the improvisation of a performance was good, not because I remember the notes that were played, but I remember how I felt during the last 20 minutes. And I know that, and I talk about that with the people in my group explicitly, and like why we did or did not feel that. And it's a very conscious, aware process of like creativity within the adjacent domain, and more like the artistic side. I would think in this space, you're like hitting deadlines with different skill set and different processes, and trying to be in a creative mode of flow, like ideating.
Yeah.
So it's just like,
I think there's a lot of similarity, and we actually socialized your paper, by the way. So that went around, and it was really interesting to say that you need expertise. You need to know your craft, and then you need to know how to let go. So the jazz musician analogy is actually perfect for our profession, because that's exactly what it is. You need to know your craft. You can't rush into it. But then you need to be in that hold on state where you can let go and you just let these ideas flow. And sometimes when I see brilliant minds create, it's amazing to see that act happen because they never have the words for it. Right? But they just know how to hold on to it. So we should have the conversation, because I think there's a lot of analogy between what designers do and what musicians do. And it is about, but you can't do it unless you know how to strum that guitar, or how to make music. And it's the same thing with architecture or any design profession. You need to know the craft. And then you need to know how to let go of some of your experiential blindness and let new ideas flow. So a lot to explore, but I am so excited I met the author of the paper. Thank you. And big set of questions that are written on your paper too, by the way. So.
As a firm so value creativity, do you explicitly measure creativity in your hiring process and your evaluation process?
So I'll go back also to answer the previous question that I didn't, that do we talk about metacognition enough? Do we talk about recognizing that state? Not enough. Do we value it while hiring? The problem is that our hiring processes rely on portfolios. So you're actually relying on the product of creativity. And the product can actually be retro-engineered in some way. You're not really being able to see the action of creativity and how this person got to that product enough. So if there were ways for us to know what it took to get to that very slick portfolio, that would be a game changer too. I heard, again, in the very short time that I've been here, some self-assessments of creativity or assessments of creativity. Those are not part of our hiring process right now, but would be very interesting. There's also a narrative, we don't know whether it's true or not, that students graduating during the COVID years, their portfolios are not as strong. And again, not sure if it's true or not sure if it's a bias, which it well could be. But I think it would be really interesting to get different cohorts of students and do this assessment and see, because their learning was so different during these phases, if there is a difference there or not. But a lot of potential there, and we don't do it, and we'd be happy to pilot something like that.
And one more question.
I'm curious in terms of the clients that you build these buildings for. You know, there's some reports that going virtual or remote working staff is more productive, more efficient, more cost-saving and friendlier for the environment. However, I feel myself that doesn't promote creativity.
Right.
How do you translate these contrasting outcomes to your potential clients?
It's a great question, and also the story of my life. Just so you know, story of my life or of any corporation is competing priorities like this. I think we've had that. We have had the, yes, it's more productive and more effective and can save time. It's definitely more convenient and it's a lot more comfortable. Creativity, and this was a conversation we had just yesterday in the room, is sometimes about being in a state of discomfort and not being comfortable in some ways. And so we are having that conversation because for reasons that are very unfathomable, this idea of coming back to the office is one of the most political discussions that is out there. Like, you cannot unpack it. If you may say you're asking people to come back for one reason, but the moment you ask that, it just opens up this whole can of worms. So I think we are in the experiment right now. We do not know what the results of the experiment are. We are feeling it. From a client perspective, clients are very clear. They want outcomes. We need the creativity to get to the outcomes. The client will not come and ask you for creativity. The client will ask you for an innovation that is done in budget, on schedule, and very, very effectively. That's what they'll ask you for. Your role is to make sure that for that to happen, you make room for the creativity and room for the productivity together. And in theory, if you are creative, you're actually creative in all components of it, which means you should be able to do that cognitive offloading. You should be able to say, how do I optimize this process really well so I have time for this? There is, and I always struggle with the terms like innovation, imagination, creativity, have very fancy visuals associated with them. But they are the domain of everyday things too. They are the domain of removing obstacles so you can do transformational stuff. And I think that conversation needs to fundamentally change, where you say, you want me to be creative in how to be more productive. That's the conversation shift that needs to happen. But I will say for clients, it's all about outcomes. And for us, it's about finding the ways, the ramp ups to those outcomes, and realizing that being creative, both in the transformational design solution, but the day-to-day production of it, is kind of the need of the day in some ways. Right? I know we're out of time. Thank you so much for your time. I'm hoping there are lots of side conversations.